Ilara's fingers trembled as she pushed open the rusted iron gate. The hinges screamed in protest, a sound that sliced through the heavy silence of the afternoon. Before her stood the old family restaurant, swallowed whole by a cascade of gnarled vines and tenacious ivy. It had been years since she'd seen this place, a lifetime. It felt like. And what was once a bustling hub of life and laughter was now a tomb of dust and decay. A strange hush fell over her as she stepped onto the cracked cobblestone path. The air grew cold, carrying with it the faint scent of old spices and forgotten memories. Ilara's heart ached with a familiar pang of sorrow. This was where her parents had built their legacy, and where it had all mysteriously ended. The front door hung ajar, a gaping maw into the darkness within. She took a hesitant step inside, and the world seemed to tilt. The once vibrant dining hall was a ghost of its former self, filled with overturned chairs and tables draped in a thick layer of dust. Sunlight streamed through a broken window, illuminating 1,000 dancing motes of dust in the air. And then she heard it. A whisper, faint and fleeting, carried on the silent breeze. It was the soft, lilting voice of a child, no more than a few feet away, calling her name. Ilara! The sound was so real, so impossibly close that she spun around, her eyes scanning the empty room. There was no one there. Goosebumps prickled her arms as the whispers echoed again, growing louder, more insistent. Driven by an unknown force, she moved toward the back of the restaurant, where the kitchen and storage rooms lay. The air grew heavier, thick with an almost tangible sense of sorrow. In the corner of a dusty storage room, half hidden beneath a pile of old linens, sat a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was a dark mahogany, polished smooth despite the years. As she knelt to examine it, her breath hitched. Inscribed on the lid in elegant, flowing script were a few simple words. "Do not open unless you are ready to face love and loss again." Her hands shook as she found the rusty latch and unfastened it. Inside, the box held a collection of worn leather journals and faded photographs. She flipped through them, her heart sinking with each new face. They were the people who had vanished from the restaurant all those years. Ego, the patrons, the staff, and her own family, all gone without a trace. Their smiles were frozen in time, their eyes full of a happiness that seemed impossible now. The journals told a story of a place not just filled with food and family, but with a magic that transcended time itself, a secret passed down through generations. The last photograph in the box was different. It was smaller, tucked away at the very bottom. As she pulled it out, a gasp escaped her lips. The image was grainy and sepia-toned, showing a young woman standing in the doorway of the restaurant, her hands on her hips, a wide smile on her face. Her dress was long and flowing, the style from a century past. But her eyes? Those eyes were unmistakably her own. It was a photograph of herself, dressed in clothes from a century earlier. The whispers returned, swirling around her now. No longer just a child's voice, but a chorus of them. "We've been waiting for you, Ilara." The restaurant was not just abandoned. It was a place where time had been torn, where the past was reaching out to touch the present, and where Ilara's own story was just beginning. Ilara stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. The woman in the image, herself, was laughing, her head tilted back in a carefree manner. Behind her, the restaurant's sign, the Gilded Fork, was new and unweathered, a stark contrast to the decaying ruin she stood in now. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the dusty room. The whispers had grown into a faint murmur of voices, like 100 people talking at once, just beyond the veil of her perception. She looked from the photograph to the journals. The most recent entry was dated 1925. The writer, a woman named Genevieve, detailed her life in the restaurant, her love for her family, and the curious gifts they possessed, the ability to feel and even see echoes of the past within the restaurant's walls. One passage, however, made Ilara's blood run cold. The whispers grow louder each day, a chorus of forgotten souls. "Soon, the veil will thin enough for me to cross over. The others have already gone." "My dearest Ilara, I must do this to protect our family's secret." To ensure that the whispers never grow silent and the past is not forgotten, Ilara's head spun. Genevieve, a name she didn't recognize, yet one that felt oddly familiar. The whispers seemed to be calling out to her again. not just with her name, but with a new urgency. They were pulling her, urging her toward the center of the restaurant, where the old hearth lay, cold and full of soot. She stumbled out of the storage room, the floorboards groaning under her weight. The air grew colder with every step. When she reached the hearth, a strange blue light pulsed from within its darkness. Hesitantly, she knelt and reached out a hand. As her fingers brushed the stone, the light intensified, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Images flashed before her eyes. A bustling kitchen, a grand party with people in roaring 20s attire, and a beautiful woman who looked just like her, her eyes filled with sorrow and determination. The roar of voices suddenly quieted, replaced by a single, clear voice, Genevieve's. It was a lament filled with love and loss. "My Ilara, you've returned." "I'm sorry. I had to let them go." The whispers. They were not whispers of the past, but of a future we could not bear. A future of silence, of forgetting. The restaurant is a haven, a place where time folds in on itself, but it can also be a prison. I wove our memories into these walls to protect you, so you would remember. A wave of understanding washed over Ilara. The restaurant wasn't just abandoned, it was frozen in time. The whispers were echoes of people who chose to remain within its walls, to live forever in a cherished moment, rather than face a future that would tear them apart. Genevieve had made a choice to keep them safe, to lock away the present and live in the past, and she had passed on that choice to Ilara, her descendant. Ilara was not just a visitor. She was the key. She could either embrace the memories and join them in the past, or she could close the door forever, letting the whispers fade into the silence they feared. The blue light from the hearth grew brighter, offering her a choice between the ghosts she had just found and the lonely, empty life she had been living. The scent of old spices, once a reminder of sorrow, now felt like a warm embrace, a promise of a home she never knew she had. The whispers were no longer a mystery. They were a welcoming chorus, a family waiting for her to come back. Ilara's hand hovered over the pulsing blue light in the hearth. The offer was clear, a silent promise to pull her into the past, to reunite her with the echoes of her family she had just discovered. She saw their faces, in her mind's eye, the laughter of the woman in the photograph, the gentle eyes of her mother and father in the faded pictures, the warmth of a home she had only ever known as an empty shell. The pull was intoxicating, a siren song of belonging. But then a different memory surfaced. A memory not from the journals, but from her own life. A lonely child sitting in a silent house waiting for parents who never returned. The ache of that loss was a familiar ghost, and it was a pain she had lived with for years. Genevieve had made a choice to live in a beautiful memory. But in doing so, she had created a new kind of loss, a silence for those left behind. Ilara's hand recoiled from the light. The voices in the restaurant, a chorus of welcoming whispers, seemed to falter, their joyous chorus replaced by a collective sigh of disappointment. She had a choice to make, not just for herself, but for them. To join them would mean to abandon her own timeline, to erase the future and forever be a ghost in a gilded cage. But to stay in her own time would mean letting them go, allowing the whispers to finally fade, and the restaurant to truly become a tomb. Taking a deep, trembling breath, she made her decision. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she walked to the front door, the one she had pushed open to enter this place of memories. She grabbed the rusted handle and pulled it shut with a final, decisive clang. The sound echoed through the silent building, a punctuation mark on a story that needed an ending. As the door closed, the blue light in the hearth flickered and died. The whispers, which had been so loud just moments before, began to recede, their volume dropping until they were a faint echo, a gentle goodbye on the wind. The air grew less heavy, and the scent of decay returned, replacing the lingering scent of old spices and warmth. Ilara stood in the now silent restaurant, no longer a tomb of memories, but just an abandoned building. The weight of her choice settled over her, a mix of sorrow and liberation. She had chosen to live, to face the future, even if it meant letting go of the past she had so briefly glimpsed. She had been given the key to a beautiful prison, and she had chosen to set herself free. She walked back to the storage room, the light from the broken window now showing the dust and cobwebs for what they were, just dust and cobwebs. She carefully placed the journals and photographs back into the wooden box. the warning on the lid, "Do not open unless you are ready to face love and loss again," now felt less like a threat and more like a profound truth. She had faced both, and she had emerged not as a ghost, but as a person ready to live. As she stepped out of the restaurant and into the late afternoon sun, the heavy feeling of sorrow was gone. She looked back at the building, now just a beautiful ruin. No longer a place of mystery and magic, but a testament to a family who had loved so fiercely that they had tried to stop time itself. Ilara knew she couldn't bring them back. The Gilded Fork would remain a place where memories were trapped, but she would not be one of them. She would be the one to carry their story, to remember the love and the loss, not as a whisper in a forgotten hall, but as a living, breathing person, carrying their legacy into a future that was truly her own. The rusted gate creaked shut behind her, a final sigh of a past she was choosing to leave behind. She walked away, not a woman who had returned to her family's restaurant, but a woman who had found herself. The whispers were gone, but a new, quiet voice had taken their place, her own, full of hope for the road ahead. Ilara walked down the overgrown path, the weight of the old wooden box in her arms. The gate clanged shut behind her, a final period on a chapter she had just closed. The silence that now enveloped the restaurant felt different. It was no longer heavy with ghosts, but simply quiet. The afternoon sun, once filtered by the gloom of the vines, now felt warm and comforting on her skin. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she wasn't going back to the empty, lonely apartment she had left that morning. She was going to start fresh, with the knowledge of her family's past and the hope of her own future. As she reached the main road, she noticed an old man sitting on a bench under the shade of a large banyan tree. He was whittling a small bird from a block of wood, his hands gnarled with age. He looked up as she approached, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's a heavy burden you're carrying." "Young lady," he said, his voice raspy but kind. Ilara smiled faintly. "It's not as heavy as it looks," she replied, a genuine lightness in her tone. He nodded, a knowing look on his face. "Some things you have to carry for a while and some things you have to let go of." "Sounds like you just let go of something big." Ilara looked back at the restaurant, now just a shadowy outline against the setting sun. "I did," she said softly. "I let go of the past." The old man went back to his whittling, the sound of the knife against the wood, a gentle rhythm in the quiet afternoon. Ilara felt a sense of peace settle over her, a deep and profound feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her family's secret, not as a curse, but as a gift. They had given her a story, and now it was her turn to write her own. She took one last look at the old restaurant and then turned, her feet carrying her toward the horizon, toward a future that was no longer haunted by whispers, but filled with the promise of a new day.